M15, Leadership in the Evolution of Mobility. Sydney, Australia. Ron Sullivan, co-founder, OviDrive. Mobility and technology. Strong technology support is an essential aspect of any mobility solution. Ron Sullivan has been supporting the industry for over 20 years and is well placed to see you through the coming changes.
But I guess I'm quite visual, so as soon as Kyoto started talking about autonomous cars, I could imagine sitting in the autonomous cars. And I think the difference between me and a lot of people is that I wasn't thinking about it from work, I was thinking about getting home from the pub. And what I visualised was that I can't have a sunroof because I know that I'll be that bloke driving down the freeway. So, but when you think about autonomous cars, do you think about jumping in your autonomous car and driving to the petrol station and getting fuel? You don't. It's because what you want is you want all that stuff to happen in the background. And that stuff there is what we looked and aimed for, what we're aiming for, which is effectively autonomous fleet management. So as Shane said, I'm Ron Sullivan. I know a few of you, so I probably should sort of mention a little bit about how I ended up working for 20-odd years in a fleet management organisation and then ending up co-founding a tech company that specialises in artificial intelligence in fleet management. So it's a little bit of a journey. But I thought it'd be interesting if the tech guy couldn't work the system. My defence is Microsoft, not Apple. So a brief overview of how we came to be. I guess what I wanted to look at is mobility as a service as a future state. So how I see it working, which is just tying in a lot of the stuff that the guys have talked about today already, and just what that means from a tech perspective. What's there now? What's not going to be there? Everyone talks about on demand, and Netflix is normally it's the big killer in on demand. So I want to talk about how that would work in fleet management, and if it can work in fleet management, and just in embracing mobility as a service in your own fleet. So we were talking about in the break just jumping a ferry and then walking across the bridge to get to the office was easier than driving to the office. And if there was a solution that meant that in the rain you could get across a bridge without getting wet, then we'd probably jump at it. So just in terms of how it works within the fleet, within your fleet, and then there's some things that you can do today to get yourself ready. So I just wanted to talk about that. So I'll go back. Actually, no, I'll leave it there. So about in the late 90s, I worked for the ANZ Bank's leasing company, and what they did was they dragged about 6 of us out to build the fleet company of the future, and they coupled us up with a whole bunch of e-commerce experts, and we sat down for I think it was 9 months and went through what this was going to look like. And what happened was that at the end of it, we all got bonus, we all got told congratulations, and they grabbed the report and they stuck it in the bottom of the thing, and like all big banks in the 90s, back on the back and see you later, and no one ever saw it again. But what it did was it set me up on a journey for the next 2 decades, and that was really understanding tech and how tech fit into fleet management. So I went back to uni, so I spent the next 11 years part-time working through an e-commerce degree, and at the same time launched a small e-commerce business myself, just trialing little bits and pieces, like how to improve. I was in sales a lot, so it was how to get sales conversion rates improved using technology. So bits and pieces along those lines. But what happened was, as mobility as a service came in, so around 2015, I think we didn't say the date, so about 3 to 5 years ago. So 2015, there was a real confluence of OVD ports started to deliver information while the vehicle was mobile, and they became cheap. Artificial intelligence became open source, so all of a sudden you could access that and start to deliver upon artificial intelligence. And lastly, cloud-based infrastructure meant that I didn't have to go out and spend millions in servers and such. You could actually build from the ground up a very powerful company. So that was where that concept started to come from, was the merging of those 3 points. So we took that, and mobility started to come out, or mobility as a service started to come out as a concept as well at that time. And what we thought was really interesting is all the stuff we talked about on the front side. No one was talking about how to actually do it at the back end and all of that stuff. So if you think about the big fleets, I'll call them super fleets, someone's got to keep those super fleets on the road registered and insured. So when we talk about what is mobility as a service for me, it's really a case of how I got to the airport. I jumped on the train because I wanted to bypass the congestion coming in, because I was coming in at peak hour. Then I jumped an Uber at the train station out to the taxi because the train link's terrible in Perth. And then I jumped the train from the airport here down into here. So the way I would expect to see it is that, and the tech exists now for this to occur, and it's trialled in a number of different ways, is that I'll just put my destination, where I want to go, the purpose of my journey, and when I want to go there. And it will design based on my profile what that trip will look like. So it might be a train, might be an Uber, might be a car share, it might be my car, which is parked downstairs. So a combination of those aspects. And that's going to end up with my journey piece. Where I think the slightly different from the common literature at the moment is, I think what's missing in there for me is fit for purpose. So there's another section. I think Macy might have mentioned fit for purpose as a requirement. So what is that journey for? So that was really easy. I just had a bag over my shoulder. But if I was an electrician going to a job, there's a very good chance that I would need a ladder. So I can't imagine me carrying a ladder on the train in the middle of peak hour. So within that digital profile, I would expect that it would know what the purpose of my journey was. So from that purpose, it would help define what the restrictions were. And the other aspect that I think is really important is that it needs to understand within that purpose who I'm representing. So I'm happy to go on the train. My employer is not happy for me to go on the train for occupational health and safety, so they cut the train out of there. But when I'm on a date, I'm going on Uber Black. So it needs to adjust for all of those different requirements. Now, for that to happen, it actually needs to happen seamlessly. And by that, I mean, I shouldn't be telling it every time, do this, do that. It needs to recognise the profile, adjust it. And that information needs to come through as it needs to come through in such a way that if data changes and I've got a trip, so a leg which is an Uber trip, and there's no Uber there waiting, then it'll automatically adjust my route. So it'll change to whether I go, they calls me a chauffeur or whatever. So it automatically makes those changes. So how does this work? I guess when we're looking at what this would look like as a future for fleet, is probably starts here. Emotional influences. Until we disconnect our drivers from how they get somewhere, and I think Gautam might have been talking about this as well, disconnecting the emotional aspect of how you get somewhere. So you just really want to drink the milk. You don't necessarily need the cow. You just want the milk. So to do that, we really need seamless physical linking of the modes. So modes is the different way you're going to get somewhere. So if you tell me I've got to walk a kilometre and a half across the bridge to get to the office at the end of my commute, I don't want to do it. I'm going to stay dry. So there needs to be a physical linking. And we all know if we've got to sit at the train station for 7 minutes waiting for the train to arrive because we've caught an Uber and then we've got a train and then we're getting another one, that's going to be the longest 7 minutes of our life and we'll never catch that again. We're just going to jump the next one. It's going to be an Uber straight across. So it's got to have a seamless physical linking of both to achieve that. Now, the other underlying factor is that if we look at it from a big fleet perspective, whoever can get their fleet the most efficient is going to deliver the cheapest version, which is going to be the one that stacks up. So when we talk about the number of providers that are going to be out there and that consolidation of providers, this is what's going to drive that consolidation piece. So the economic value, the efficient management of the encompassing system. So to do that, you need connected cars. You need fast correlation and interpretation of data. So that's artificial intelligence telling me that there's a breakdown, I'm no longer going down that route, reroute me somewhere else or throw me onto a train. And that needs to occur. So you need smart assets to be able to know exactly where everything is. So I need to know where the trains are exactly. I need to know how they're going exactly. So all that data infrastructure that we saw at the end of Vijay's slide. So that smart infrastructure. and the interconnected data feeds, so the ability to interpret all of those different feeds comes up with an answer. So that's what you'll need in that future state. And this is the last bit, which is interesting because we touched on it, and I think the first speaker as well, which is blockchain. How's that going to fit in it? So really, we talked about protecting the consumer, but it's about fast-moving, fast-evolving contracts. That's really what blockchain is for. Now, I understand on a supply side, so me as a consumer wanting to jump in and out of a vehicle or out of a train and then being able to record those transactions and effectively enter into a contract with people on that side. But when I look at it from a fleet management perspective, a lot of that's occurring already today. It's just that we do it with contractual agreements. So what are the chances that anyone's going to invest heavily in blockchain to reproduce what we do today for some minor savings in, transactional cost? So I'm not sure that it's going to fit in on the supply side in the short term, but I already can think of, if I only drive my car in the city, then I have a certain insurance rating, so I'm actually quite a good insurance risk. But I decide I want to go drive up the coast. As soon as I jump in the car and get on the freeway and start heading north, the system needs to be able to identify that I'm actually now outside of my normal usage patterns and create a fast contract with an insurer of my choice to insure me for that higher risk trip. And so they're the changes that I see, something like blockchain, but I'm still not convinced of what that killer side app is for blockchain. So I've got a couple of guys who are just mad for this stuff, and they said, we'll do it as a weekend project, so it's not even going to cost you if you can come up with a cool idea. And I haven't actually been able to come up with a super cool idea on it yet. But the sharing of from a blockchain perspective, do you mean?
Yeah, so you see a lot of, people who are hesitant for the sharing of data. You look at the uproar with the government hospital.
Ah, yes.
If suddenly people know that there's this platform understands when they're moving, they don't want the service to know that they're going outside their normal risk zone because they don't want that increased cost. You think it's going to take one for the consumer to adjust?
Absolutely. But in saying that, they all do it with, it's a bad example now because of the scare of Facebook, but how much did they lose really in terms of customers out of that? Not much. Yep.
Social media platform, a little bit more hesitant, but if it's convenient and economic and a place I can trust and it's not a bank, it's okay.
And that, I think some of that might actually be where the blockchain sits as well, because that can protect the identity but actually link who you are. So I can be assured that you're who you say you are without knowing who you are. And that may be where the supply side part of blockchain will actually come in. So you may actually see that one, and then you'll be able to, we'll call it the Kim product or something.
I think in addition to that, when we're talking about how, as a consumer, that you be able, or as a corporate, you be able to see what's going on with your fleet and all this, what will be happening, I think in the future, is there will be apps where it's connected to your tax file numbers, connected to your employment background, that you are a sales rep or someone, and then somehow those things will link up to each other. So when you're actually using the carpool or car shares, then the tax agents or the VAT will be able to see that as part of your journey. So everything can be linked up to your tax file number.
I absolutely agree. It probably won't be tax file number, it'll be some sort of digital profile. And the reason why I absolutely agree is that they're already doing that in HR now. So they're using blockchain. So when you front up at a job and you've got your job history, they're protecting your job history in blockchain. So they don't have to reference check. They'll know exactly you start, you finish. You can actually encode your performance and it can give you a rating. So you don't divulge any of your private information. But back to that, you say you are who you are, and I can trust that without knowing who you are. And that's what the concept is. So absolutely. So in, I guess when we look at that, I look at Netflix itself. And if you think about Netflix, the whole idea of Netflix, they got rid of the video store. I think the last couple of video stores stopped. They started off as a little mail order system, and I read a lot about the Netflix style of delivery on demand. So you get a vehicle when you need a vehicle that delivers to your front door, as killing owning your own vehicle, owning your own fleet. I've got a couple of issues with that. Probably the main one is if it's Valentine's Day and 1 million users want to watch the movie Valentine's Day, who cares? There's 1 million copies delivered out there. But if it's the first beautiful spring day on a public holiday and everyone wants to garden and they want 1 million people want 1 million views, they're not going to be sitting around ready to be delivered. So I think utilisation is going to be a critical impactor on demand. And then if you think about on Netflix, I can't watch Game of Thrones, and I can't on Spotify, I can't listen to Jay-Z and Beyonce. So different platforms are going to have different content. So you're going to be restricted, and the level of palatability means that you might be cross-platform. So then whatever systems are sitting in place for that also need to be cross-platform. And everyone always starts these journeys quite proprietary. So I think that back to that consolidation, the ones that will link are probably going to be better. But the biggest issue you have with integrating multiple systems, which is where a lot of the market's trying to get to at the moment, is that if you're on system 1, I can do analytics using artificial intelligence. If you're on system 2, I can use analytics. But as soon as I need to take an action and I've got 2 systems, I can't act across 2 systems as an AI. And if that's owned by one and that's owned by another person, then they're not going to let me take an action. And for example, that may be a fuel card. So if I've got a platform 1, which is a fuel card, I pull up at the service station, it identifies which vehicle I'm driving in, it identifies my odometer, it tells me my consumption rate, so I know it's due for a refill. So that's platform 1. Platform 2 is the actual fuel provider. If they're not integrating in with those, then I can't act to unlock the browser to enable them to process the fuel. So that's sort of where single platforms and the AI impact will significantly run over the top of multiple platforms. So when I look at owning your own fleet, when I look at owning your own fleet, and I look and say, would I put a mass solution in? So if you come to me tomorrow and said, Ron, for $5 a kilometre, I've got access to 100,000 cars and a multitude of different vehicle types. Jump in, get rid of your fleet, and just pay for what you use. Would you do it? And it's actually really hard to answer. I mean, we're sort of all here because we're a little bit practical in the way we do it. We've constantly balanced business requirements with safety requirements, with the emotional investment of our drivers and employees on vehicles. So we're going to do that balance. We're going to say, okay, well, I mean, the original mass solution on mobility is a set of solutions, rental car. So why don't I have 100% rentals in my fleet? But because I know that I never drop below 100 cars at any point in time, so I'm better off to go and lease one at 40% of the cost of renting it. So those cost parameters are going to impact in there. So it's going to be, for us, it's going to be more about what do we need in terms of information in our hand. So the example I had is if someone said tomorrow you only pay for what you use a kilometre, so the calculation is going to be, if it's 800 now and the driver travels 2,000 a month, $2.50 a kilometre, when you balance it out, you look and go, you know what, at a certain tipping point, at a dollar point, where you just go, no, I'm just going to keep my own vehicle. And that's the process we're all going to do. The only thing is that we need to now understand, if you drive that ute, we'll talk about this a little earlier, if you're driving the ute, but I only use it once a month, the rest of the time I probably could be in a little Corolla, then why am I driving a $900 a month vehicle instead of a $450 a month vehicle just for one day? So understanding the purpose of the journey comes back into it again. And the last bit that I look at is the difference between business and private use. I mean, when we were designing the electronic logbook, we went through the whole requirement for logbooks. I'm not going to bore everyone because we all know exactly what it's done. It came out for testing, and I went to run a logbook, and it was only by user. I couldn't get a logbook by car, and I went back to the team and said, "Why? Where's the logbook?" I said, "Here it is." When I said, "But it's got to be by car," they looked at me like I was stupid. Said, "Why would you care?" Because really all you care about is your driver or your user and how much it's costing to mobilise the user. So surely you want your logbook by car. So now I've got a logbook by car and a logbook by person. But it shows that we tend to get stuck in the areas that because we've always done it that way. But what we need to know from a mobility as a service perspective is we need to start to understand what the cents per kilometre it's costing us to mobilise a driver, and if we're optimising the way that we mobilise the driver. So to be able to answer those questions, so how do we answer those questions? So there's a couple of reasons, or a couple of things that we need to do. So I'll just put it up there. Can you read it from the back? Because some I could, some I couldn't. So what am I using the vehicle for? Fit for purpose, and my split between work and private. But that's got to be by car, and it's got to be cost per kilometre, so cents per kilometre. On the drivers, how often do I use the vehicles? How far am I going? Cost per kilometre, split between work and private. So that's stuff you need to have. You need to be understanding the bit that we were talking about with workplace and real estate. Understand your future service delivery mechanisms. And with the suppliers, it's capturing all of the costs that come through so you can allocate it correctly across the vehicle. So when we look at what that means, the sheer volume of data that you would be seeing come through and how you handle that volume of data, that was probably the biggest hurdle that I saw with becoming mass ready. So the only way I could see to resolve that was what you used to call telematics, which is really just data about the vehicle. That's got to be captured automatically in whatever system that you're looking at using. The stuff that was your maintenance control needs to be, or your maintenance management and all of the costs that entails need to be captured. And then your fleet management, which is all your supply chain stuff, your fuel, your servicing, your registration, all of that needs to be data captured and then put into a central point. So when you combine those, that's when you can start to collate all that data, and that's when you can use AI technology to start to turn that data into something meaningful. So in itself, it's not meaningful, but when you put it into an ecosystem, so a controlled ecosystem, that's actually when it becomes really powerful. So we take those three factors and think about what that means. So if I get an infringement comes through, my driver has a profile. Every time they jump into a vehicle, they marry against that vehicle, so I know that they're in that vehicle at that point in time. An infringement comes through, we'll call it a supplier, they make enough money out of us, feeds straight into a system, it identifies who's got it and sends to that digital profile a copy of the infringement, and then it acts on that infringement. So that's the sort of data that you're catching without you having to do anything yourself, and then on that driver, you record your infringements occurred, and then when you're looking from a risk perspective, you might have your accident data will then correlate with your maintenance data, which will then correlate with your fuel consumption data, which will then correlate with your driver behaviour data. All of that pulls into a central point and gives you a risk profile on who your top 3, top 10 at-risk drivers are, who your top 10 most likely part failures are by downtime of your vehicle or by cost of your vehicle. And the other one that we were looking at is how do you pull this data through from the mechanics? And this was, interestingly, it's the only thing we've seen so far is when your vehicle triggers a service environment, so it pulls an odometer live from the system, it triggers a service because you know the service schedule because you've got a profile of your car. It then opens up a line of communication between your driver and your mechanic to say, okay, you're due for service now, book it in. Use your artificial intelligence and your machine learning algorithms in the baseline here to basically understand what actions are being taken and work out if it's a one-off action that needed a human to be involved or whether it was an ongoing action. If it's an ongoing action, then you can teach a brain to actually reproduce that when it occurs in a similar fashion. So then you start to reduce the flow back out to your fleet managers, which is the ultimate intention. So every time, and I can't remember whose slide it was, talked about the little amount of money that's spent in fleet management. And that's true. I mean, how many times have we tried to do an ROI exercise, spend a little bit of money to save a lot of money, and how hard it is to actually get through the process. So a big part of what we needed to achieve was we needed to get that infrastructure to be as light as it possibly can. So I was talking about the OBD. That OBD will not exist in a very, very short period of time. The manufacturers it was an interesting about face, or what appeared to be about face, where they were always quite conservative. All of a sudden, changed their stance to move from being worried they were going to be relegated to being a hardware manufacturer, and they're moving from necessarily being a product to actually being a service. That's what we're seeing. And part of that migration from being a product to a service will be things like subscription models for their vehicles, so pay a fixed amount for their vehicle. But one of the things that they're looking at is monetizing the transfer of data from your vehicle. So we expect that OBD will close. There's two trains of thought. One is that they'll hold the data internally, but I think there's enough aftermarket suppliers out there and customers screaming for independent information. I think Toyota's got a centralized hub that the data goes into, which they're using with Avis budget, ABG, I think, is trialling that at the moment. And there's a few of them that are heading down that path. So I wouldn't be an OBD telematics company for quids at the moment. And in fact, the biggest mover in this market, if you're ever interested, is the infotainment guys. So you always thought that they were going to be, watching the TV in your autonomous car. No, they're a little bit more than that. They're actually starting to pull data from the ECU as well. So they've obviously solved a lot of the firewall issues that they had at the time. So that's starting to happen. And that leads on to your phone. So we said, okay, the easiest way is you think about all your, you think the sensors that sit in a phone. So it records how many steps you take and how often you take the steps. So let's just use something that's more powerful than what launched the Apollo to the moon, and sits in your car, sort of not doing an awful lot while you're driving. So we used the phone, but mainly because 88% of us have a smartphone in Australia, and 45% of us are that wedded to it that in the first 5 minutes of waking up, we check our phone to see what's going on in our world. Okay.
It's the alarm clock. It's turn it off now. What have I got coming through?
I also don't. So the reason we wanted that is that that's your digital footprint, because it's with you. You're carrying it everywhere. So as soon as you jump in the car, it just connects straight across to this little one, and I now know you're there. So that's how we get that digital profile. But again, that's not going to last, because those infotainment systems are all being personalised to you. So they're starting to put the apps in the car. So my expectation is that every single vehicle will be delivered with a virtual fleet manager at some point in time in the next few years. So you'll just turn up and it'll keep your car registered. It'll within the boundaries that you set around its insurance, you can set it up. It'll keep it insured for you. It'll do all of the administrative stuff. And the last bit was the system itself, and that's where all the brain sits. Yeah, pulling all of those suppliers into that environment. So I guess when we were sitting down building the start of the journey, the idea was you always aim for where you want to get to, but you solve the problems immediately. So the things that I looked at when I look at from a tech perspective, and what I learned moving away from a fleet perspective, is that we're always taught that a new system was implemented in a fleet company, I'd get flown to Brisbane for a week to learn how to quote and probably to check a couple of things so that I could answer some questions. Invariably, I'd come back and I might be able to quote, I might be able to check a couple of things. The systems have changed now, so they're actually really fast to use. We'd had someone use a system in 20 minutes. They were comfortable to use it. The other one that I found was really interesting is that the old school long-term implementations is changed. So that in the tech environment, that's no longer acceptable. You can't have long, hard implementations. And similarly, lock-in contracts to lock you into something that they're not delivering will be relegated to the province of your telcos. So I think Telstra is going to be the last dying bastion of long-term contracts and they're not delivering. I say that flippantly, only because I was out with a customer who had one of those virtual assistants on their front desks that you can type in, and he paid a monthly fee and it would work for 1 day of every month. But anyway, so that's gone in terms of locked in contracts, and I think the other bit that I think has changed in the tech environment is that the way things were delivered, we used to run away, build a product, and then deliver that product, and it was almost like off the shelf. The way design methodology now is it's agile and it's lean. So you deliver a product, so you deliver a minimum product. So that was where we looked at. That was the minimum product you needed to do to break into, get into a fleet business. But that's got to be the first step of your design. So you deliver fast, and then you have a feedback loop. So you have a roadmap of what you're going to deliver, and then your customer feedback then helps define your user interface. And that methodology means that if you're looking for a system, then any system that you are going to put in that's going to take you down that road to mass needs to be in fast, not locked in. It needs to be user-friendly. It needs to capture your cost per user, so not just your cost per asset. And it needs to actually pull that data in such a way that you as a business don't have to touch that data at all. And it needs to pull it in such a way that it can use it to minimise the amount of work that you need to do, because that's the role of a system in the cloud-based SaaS environment. And lastly is that the beauty of a cloud system is that you can use it anywhere. And what we were taught about the structure of users has changed. So I can have a fleet company with a maintenance control person outsourced to a KTAS or someone like that doing all the maintenance control, at the same time that the financial approver is based in Japan. So, and that's the beauty of a cloud-based system. So when we talk about how to get to mass and all of the things we'll talk about with the mass solution, there's the tech's there. The actual tech's there, and these companies are doing it. And then the road to the supplier-side enablement of fleet management or autonomous fleet management is actually the journey is well underway. Thank you.